This is still Unanswered. I'm Claire Donnelly. Today we return to a case that has become, in a way, a quiet shorthand for one of the modern mysteries of our age. A man who travelled to the west of Ireland, erased almost everything that could tell the world who he was, and then, 4 days later, was found dead on a beach. He checked in as Peter Bergmann, and yet, years on, we still do not know his true name. Today I'm joined by Dr. Michael Hartman, former missing persons analyst and criminologist. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Claire. It's an honor to be here. This case, it's one of those that stays with you, not because there's some violent twist, but because of the deliberate silence around it. There are so many small clinical choices he made that point to intent, and then this vast, aching unknown.
Exactly. Well, we'll begin with what we know, carefully, chronologically, and then we'll dig into the questions it raises. Why would a man in his late 50s or early 60s, with advanced cancer and serious heart problems, travel to Sligo and take pains to remove identifying marks from his clothing, to buy stamps and write letters that were never accounted for, and then to disappear into the night? Who was he trying to protect? Or what, if anything, was he trying to achieve? Let's set the scene. June 12, 2009.
Right. So, on the afternoon of June 12th, CCTV in Sligo captures a man getting off a bus coming from Derry. He's carrying a purple plastic bag and a black shoulder bag. Later that evening, he checks into the Sligo City Hotel under the name Peter Bergmann, giving a Vienna address. Einstettersne 15, Wien 4472, an address that doesn't actually exist. He pays cash, requests a single room, and books 3 nights, breakfast included. He appears polite, reserved, not talkative. Simple details, but they matter.
They do. For listeners who prefer the slow burn reconstruction, this is where it gets strange. Over the next 3 days, CCTV shows him leaving the hotel multiple times, 13 exits by one count, and nearly every time he's carrying that purple plastic bag. It looks full when he leaves. When he returns, the bag is often missing or flattened. It's almost as if he's leaving with something and bringing back nothing, or bringing back a different state of the bag, predictably emptied. Michael, what does that pattern tell you?
It's methodical. The simplest interpretation is he was disposing of belongings, papers, labels, anything that would tie him to a life elsewhere. The repeated single-purpose departures suggest he knew precisely what he needed to discard and where to discard it. In criminal investigations, we often see that kind of routine in people who are trying to sever ties, whether to avoid prosecution, to hide assets, or to prevent identification after death. But here there's an odd overlay. The man was seriously ill. Advanced prostate cancer, bone metastases, history of heart attacks, 1 kidney. It's not the profile you expect for someone running from the law. So the methodical erasure feels like a personal ritual.
Personal ritual. I like that phrase. It has a ritual's controlled, almost ceremonial air. He also visited the local post office. Witnesses and CCTV place him buying 10 stamps, stationery, perhaps writing letters in the hotel lobby. Those letters, did he send them? If he did, who received them? The image is haunting. a sick man writing letters in a quiet Irish hotel while cutting labels out of his clothes.
It is haunting. There are a few possibilities with the letters. He might have mailed them to people who would honor his wish for distance, or who, for whatever reason, never contacted authorities. He might have written to aliases, to addresses that lead nowhere. Or he might not have posted them at all. For an investigator, those stamps and that stationery are frustratingly suggestive but non-committal.
Frustratingly suggestive, that's exactly right. And the clothing details, you've looked at these closely in the past. Tell listeners the specific garments and the small forensic details that make this feel intentional rather than accidental.
He wore clothing with brand labels deliberately removed. Reports list a black leather C&A jacket, navy C&A chinos, a black Tommy Hilfiger sleeveless pullover, a leather belt marked Key West USA, made in Italy, and German-made Finn Comfort black leather shoes, size 44, manufactured in 2002. The Finn Comforts are significant. They're quality German-made shoes favored by older people with foot problems. Labels in garments are how investigators trace purchase history, where something was sold, sometimes even with shop. Cutting out those tags suggests he didn't want anybody to trace the origin of his clothes.
And yet, even with those measures, enough remained to say he likely had Germanic connections. The shoes, the accent people heard, the fake Austrian address he provided. Investigators later focused on Austria and Germany for that reason. But before we go international, let's talk about the hospital visit. On one of the days, June 14 or 15, he walks into Sligo General Hospital and does not give his name. He seeks some kind of medical contact and leaves without registering properly. That feels almost like a test. Would you agree, Michael?
Yes. To walk into a hospital while seriously ill, to seek help but decline to give identifying details, this is deliberate. He may have wanted medical confirmation of his condition without creating a record. Or he could have been searching for pain relief and declining against it when faced with formalities. Another possibility is that he was checking how easily he could vanish. It's as if he was rehearsing the erasure.
Rehearsing the erasure. I keep coming back to that phrase. We have to remember, he wasn't behaving like someone in obvious panic. He was calm, methodical, sometimes even polite to hotel staff. People remember him as reserved, not frantic. There's a dignity to the way he reportedly handled himself. Yet all the actions, cash payments, fake address, removed labels, point to an intention to become untraceable. He controlled what he could control and left everything else ambiguous.
And then there's the night of June 15th. He checks out around 1 p.m., pays cash to extend his stay one more night, and later that evening buys a one-way bus ticket to Ross's Point. He boards a bus late at night. Ross's Point is a coastal area, quiet, dark, not well covered by CCTV. It's a place where someone could be alone, where the sea and the wide horizon lend themselves to final acts. When people think of planned disappearances, they often imagine remote landscapes. This, Ross's Point, is that kind of place.
He's last seen on CCTV getting on that bus. Sometime during the night, accounts vary, he arrives at Ross's Point. The following morning, June 16th, two people, Walkers, joggers, discover a body lying on the sand near the waterline. Items are scattered: his shoes, socks, jacket, a watch, hotel soap, tissues, some plasters, and mild painkillers. Notably absent: ID, money, passport, prescription medication you'd expect for someone with advanced cancer. The post-mortem 2 days later would give us more answers and more questions.
The autopsy concluded cause of death was acute cardiac arrest. There was no water in the lungs, so he didn't drown. There was no evidence of external violence. He had advanced prostate cancer with bone metastases, a history of multiple heart attacks, and only one kidney. There were no chemotherapy drugs, no high doses of strong painkillers in his system. Some mild analgesics were present, but nothing to suggest an overdose or planned chemical suicide. So medically, the death can be explained by his pre-existing conditions, but it doesn't clarify whether he intended to die that night or whether his body simply gave up after a period of severe illness.
Meaning that technically the cause was natural, a heart stoppage, but the context is the uncanny part. He deliberately eliminated traceable identifiers and chose a public shoreline at night. Michael, help me parse this. Is it more likely he wanted death to come naturally in a place of his choosing, or that he undertook actions that raised the odds of a fatal event without taking a visibly violent step?
Both are plausible. One theory is that he sought a controlled, dignified end without resorting to an explicit method like overdose or a weapon. By placing himself in a cold, exposed environment, perhaps near water, he increased the chance of cardiac arrest or another acute event. That could be a morally driven choice. He might have believed in letting nature close the book. Another theory is that he wanted to leave no paper trail, to cut off family, or to disappear from an identity he could no longer bear. The lack of a definitive suicide method complicates the narrative, but the cumulative evidence, the careful erasure, tilts toward intentional self-erasure rather than pure accident.
There's also the spy novel angle that crops up in public debates. The fake name, the cache, the careful removal of labels. Some suggest he could have been involved in intelligence work or had criminal connections that necessitated anonymity. You've dealt with cases where people with intelligence backgrounds stage disappearances. How plausible is that theory here?
It's a narrative the public finds irresistible because it explains the uncommon precision. However, the man's age and health profile, advanced cancer, heart disease, make active intelligence work less likely. Intelligence operatives don't often stage their own deaths by sitting on a beach and hoping a heart attack finishes the job. That said, former operatives or people with criminal ties sometimes live under assumed names. If he had decades of secrecy in his past, it could explain a desire for final privacy. But there's no evidence of pursuit or violence, no assassination signs. So, while it's entertaining as a theory, it's not supported by the medical or forensic facts we have.
Understood. Another theory, perhaps closer to what many of us imagine, was that he wanted to spare his family the pain of watching him decline, or to protect them from shame, debt, or scandal. If he had loved ones who would be hurt by his illness or his choices, disappearing could have been, in his view, a mercy. But then, if he was trying to spare them, why not leave a note? Or why write letters and perhaps not send them? Why put his body in a place where someone would certainly find him?
Good questions. The absence of a clear explanation from the letters, if they were ever mailed, adds to the sense of secrecy. It's possible he wrote to explain and asked for silence. Some people believe that if you tell certain people you intend to die on your own, they will respect that wish. We don't know. We also have to consider social isolation. Many older men with serious illness live estranged from family. They may have few contacts, or they might have been living a life that didn't intersect with people who would recognize a news story about an unidentified body in Ireland. It's a tragic but common reality in many European societies.
That brings us to another disturbing fact. Despite clear photographs, a reconstructed facial image, dental records, no one has claimed him. No family has come forward. His fingerprints and DNA were checked against national and international databases with no match. Austria was contacted about the fake address and the name. No match. For the public listening at home, this is the part that keeps people awake. It's not just that he chose to die anonymously. It's that no one has said, "That's my brother," or "That's my father." Why do you think that is, Michael?
There are several possibilities. First, he might have been genuinely isolated. No close family or friends who would recognize him from media. Second, he may have lived transnationally, moving between countries and creating shallow ties so that no single community recognized him. Third, some people do know and have chosen not to speak, out of respect for a wish or because they were involved in something they didn't want scrutinized. Fourth, record-keeping and cross-border integration aren't perfect. Depending on where his records are, they might not have been checked or accessible in 2009 the way they are now. And finally, some families simply don't consume international news. If a brother lived in Eastern Europe and didn't see Irish media, he might never make the connection.
All plausible. In the years since, there have been renewed appeals. Gardaí issued a public appeal in October 2021. Locate International, a UK-based cold case charity, issued a widely publicised appeal and an updated forensic facial depiction in 2023, encouraging anyone, especially in Germany or Austria, to come forward. Yet the case remains unresolved. There's a symbolic weight to the fact that he was buried under the name he used at the hotel, Peter Bergmann, on September 18, 2009. An unmarked or minimally attended service, and a headstone carrying a name that investigators suspect is false.
It's a poignant, almost ironic end. In life, he cut away labels and erased traces. In death, he's labeled with a name he likely fabricated. For families, a burial under a false name is unbearable if it's their loved one. For investigators, it's a duty unfulfilled. The renewed appeals are important because they use new tools. Better facial composites, interactive online visualizations, and a broader reach into European communities. But even those tools depend on someone, somewhere, recognizing a face or responding to the idea that this could be a brother, husband, or friend.
You mentioned new tools. One area the public often asks about is DNA genealogy, the techniques that have solved so many cold cases in recent years. Why hasn't modern investigative genealogy solved this case? Is it being used? Could it be used?
We can't comment on active investigative capabilities, but in principle, forensic genealogy could help if usable DNA is available, and the investigators are able to compare it to databases that permit law enforcement access. There are legal and ethical hurdles, especially across borders. Some countries share data more readily than others. Additionally, if his family decided to keep their distance, or if he had few relatives whose DNA is on public genealogy sites, then matches might not appear. That said, as more people add their data to consumer databases, the chance of a familial link grows. It's reasonable to hope that forensic genealogy may eventually provide a lead.
So, in a sense, time works both ways. Records fade and memories dim, but databases and digital tools expand. Michael, you've worked on cross-border identifications. The shoes, Fin Comfort, are German-made. The name and address point to Austria. The accent, witnesses reported, Germanic. How typical is it for someone from continental Europe to travel to a place like Sligo to end their days? Is there anything specific about Ireland that would attract a person seeking anonymity?
Ireland is a small country, but an attractive location for several reasons. Ross's Point is remote enough to feel private, yet it's easily reached. There are bus links from nearby towns. For someone who had spent time traveling across Europe, it might have been chosen for its landscape, its quiet, or for symbolic reasons. Maybe a place he visited in earlier life, or a place he associated with peace. Also, Ireland's international profile in popular culture might make it an appealing final destination for someone seeking a particular kind of solitude. It's hard to generalize, but the choice of a coastal, low-surveillance spot is consistent with someone wanting a private end rather than a public statement.
That makes sense. Let's step back to the emotional center of this mystery, the man himself. We know the clinical facts: age range, health conditions, the gold tooth, a single kidney. But beyond facts, there's a human image we can sensibly infer: an aging man, in pain, making careful, distinct decisions in the last days of his life. He's not an abstract mystery. He's a person who once had a history, relationships, a set of accumulated choices. I want to ask you, Michael, as an analyst, how do you balance the procedural need to solve a case with the ethical reality that the person may have intended to disappear?
That's one of the most challenging parts of this work. On the one hand, we have legal and societal obligations to identify the deceased, to provide closure to families, and to ensure there was no crime. On the other hand, if someone consciously erased their identity and chose anonymity in death, we must respect personal agency to some degree. But respect does not override legal duty. Identification serves practical purposes: next of kin notification, estate closure, public health records. Ethically, I think investigators should pursue identity while being mindful of dignity, trying to balance transparency with sensitivity to a likely motive for privacy. It's a delicate line.
Delicate indeed. We've spoken a lot about motives and theories. Let's run through them succinctly for listeners so they can hold the possibilities in their mind. 1. Planned, controlled suicide or self-disappearance. 2. He wanted to die naturally in a place he chose. 3. Involvement with intelligence or criminal activity. 4. Fleeing shame, debt, or family complications. Which of those, if you had to weigh them right now, feels most plausible?
If pressed, I'd weigh the first two planned self-disappearance or an intentional choice to let nature take its course higher than the others. The pattern of erasure, the hospital visit without identification, the purchase of stamps and letters all suggest a settled plan. The intelligent/criminal theory is less likely based on his health and lack of violent signs. But, I'll stress, plausibility is not proof. Any of these scenarios could be true in part.
Fair. Listeners, we're going to take a moment now to slow the narrative and imagine a few scenes in more detail, only to humanize the man who became the most famous name he probably never had. Picture a small, middle-aged hotel lobby in Sligo in June. Rain outside, a quiet hum. He sits at a table with a small pile of papers and a stack of stamps. He writes slowly, as if composing instructions or final words, then folds the paper into an envelope. He goes out, walks the town, slips the envelope into a letterbox. Or he doesn't. These are the moments when the truth could have been known.
When we do that, we have to stop fantasizing about a mystery and instead listen for the human motives under it. Shame, love, a wish to spare others, or simple exhaustion. And occasionally a mundane reality, someone who just wanted to die in peace. We can debate legality, morality, and motive until we're hoarse, but at the center is a human choice that remains incompletely explained.
Yes, I find, personally, that imagining his inner life is both an act of empathy and an investigative tool. Empathy helps us ask different questions. Did he leave instructions? Did he want someone to find him? Did he hope a stranger would bury his body properly? Sometimes thinking about the subjective motivation opens new lines of factual inquiry. Michael, investigatively, what would you try next if you were reopening the case today with modern tools?
I'd prioritize forensic genealogy if DNA samples are viable and the legal frameworks allow it. I'd also re-examine the postcards and the potential letter routes if he bought 10 stamps, even if some letters weren't posted. Tracking street-level CCTV from post offices or mailboxes. Or interviewing postal workers again for any memory. People sometimes recall anomalies years later. Then I'd broaden the international outreach, especially to Germany and Austria, with updated facial composites and the story framed in a way that resonates with communities who might not think to check Irish media. And, importantly, work with consumer genealogy services under ethical guidance to see if distant relatives can be connected.
Those are practical steps. It's also worth noting that Locate International released an interactive visualization and a new facial depiction in 2023, tools that aim to make the evidence more accessible to people who may have a memory tucked away. Small stimuli can trigger recall. That's one reason we're telling the story again here, in the hope that a listener will think, wait, that person, that could be my neighbor, my uncle, even after all these years.
Absolutely. Memory is a fragile thing. People don't always link memories to news stories. A German neighbor might recall an older man with similar shoes who disappeared from a shared apartment in 2008 and never notified authorities. That fragment, combined with a modern facial composite, could break the case open.
So let's be practical. If anyone listening, especially in Germany, Austria, or anywhere in Central Europe, hears this and thinks they might recognize the man known as Peter Bergmann, how should they contact authorities? For the record, Garda Síochána encourages anyone with information to contact Sligo Garda Station. Locate International also runs appeals. Their website includes case details. We'll post resources in the episode notes. Michael, any final thoughts before we describe where the man was buried and how he is remembered?
Only that the burial under the name he gave, Peter Bergmann, adds a final layer of irony. He is interred in Sligo Cemetery, the headstone carrying the name he likely fabricated. It's a reminder of the limits of identity when deliberate erasure meets public duty, and a reminder that solving such cases isn't just about facts, it's about reuniting stories.
Beautifully said. A few facts to close our reconstruction. Arrival in Sligo, June 12, 2009. Body found at Ross's Point, morning of June 16, 2009. Post-mortem, June 17. Burial, September 18, 2009. The physical descriptors. Age, 55 to 60. Height, about 1.79 meters. Short grey hair. Gold tooth, Finn Comfort, size 44 shoes, labels removed, advanced prostate cancer, bone metastases, 1 kidney. These details anchor a man who decided how he would be in his last days, down to the cut labels.
And the unanswered questions remain. Who was he really? Did he want to spare family or wanted to hide his past? Was he respected in a community that never spoke? Or did he simply want to die as an anonymous person on a beach that felt right to him? We may never know. But every case like this invites us to work a little harder, to look a little more patiently, because finally, names matter.
Names matter. That's the heart of Still Unanswered. We don't chase sensationalism. We follow the human ledger. What was lost, what might be returned. Before we finish, Michael, could you speak to listeners about what investigators felt when they encountered the purple bag routine? What was the emotional reaction in Sligo Garda Station as the weeks stretched on?
From accounts and my own experience, investigators feel a mix of professional curiosity and a quiet sadness. There's admiration, this person planned meticulously, but admiration quickly turns to empathy. This person intentionally denied themselves a recorded life. For officers who want to restore the dead to their rightful identity, that intention is a painful barrier. They're not just untangling evidence, they're trying to give a person back to their family, and every deliberate step taken to erase identity feels like a personal refusal. That tension between duty and the deceased's autonomy can be very heavy.
Heavy is an apt word. Listeners, if this episode has stirred something in you, an old memory, a thought about a neighbour or a relative, please consider acting. Contact Sligo Garda Station or Locate International. Even the smallest detail, a brand of shoes seen in a pension, a name tucked away in a ledger, can matter. We'll include contact information in the episode notes. Michael, any final note of hope you'd like to leave with our audience?
Hope is that persistence matters. We've seen cold cases solved decades later because someone finally connected a memory to a face. For the man known as Peter Bergmann, every new appeal increases the chance that someone will remember a mundane detail that becomes crucial. So don't underestimate your own memory. Share it.
Share it. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, listeners, for sitting with us through this quiet, somber story. It's not a case of dramatic twists. It's a study in what someone chooses at the end of life and how society answers those choices. If you want to learn more, check the show notes for links to Garda press releases and to Locate International's appeal. This is still unanswered. I'm Claire Donnelly. We will keep following this story. We will keep asking the quiet questions. Until next time.
Thank you, Claire.